and welcome back to Roompact's ResEdChat podcast, a platform to showcase people doing great work and talking about topics in residence life and college student housing. I'm your host, Crystal Lay, and I use the she, her series pronouns. Now, you all may know, if you're regular listeners, that every person and every topic to me is exciting. And guess what? Today is no different, because today we're going to talk about how meetings, trainings, and events can move beyond routine obligations to become more meaningful, focused, and also tied to the why. Today, we're going to talk about alignment and connection in the work that we do in housing and residence life. And I'm very excited about our guests today, and I'll have them introduce themselves.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm Kristen Rollins. So I'm super excited to be here and part of this conversation. I've spent a better part of my career in higher ed, including more than 15 years working in student affairs overall, so activities, involvement, et cetera. Even way back when I was an RA, right? I worked in res life as a student because that's how we roll in any student affairs folks. My last role was a director of a student union at a large public institution. And I've supported anything from student orgs to large scale campus events to policy, strategic initiatives, all the fun stuff. But these days, I'm actually working at a consulting firm as a consultant where I help organizations, especially in the public sector, really navigate change, improve processes, and stay connected to their mission through human-centered strategies. So it's kind of fun to take my higher ed work and flip that over into more of a consulting role. I would say my sweet spot is really connecting that big picture to day and really helping people feel equipped to do great work. So excited to be here. And also, just as a fun tip or piece of me, is that outside of work, I chase kids around. I have a couple kids, so I know how to do connection when it comes to 6 and 8-year-olds also. Um, and then I like to do things like have my book club and hang out and just do fun outdoor things in Colorado. So I'm excited to be here and figure out ways to help create more connection amongst folks.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Thank you for sharing those pieces. And I really know you're going to share some great content for our listeners and folks who may be viewing it. In your introduction, you said the C word, you said change. So I think we're going to start there. So you've had the opportunity to navigate change in everything from supporting large scale events, being the director of the student union, as you mentioned, supporting student organizations, student activities, and currently you're a consultant. So, what's one lesson from those different experiences that you think every housing professional could benefit from?
So I'm going to give you two because I can't hold it back. It's really exciting. So bear with me, but it's fun. So I think the first one that's super important to me when you think about change is that people don't really resist change. Everyone thinks that, but they don't resist change. What they do is they actually resist feeling powerless to change. And so really, if we make sure that they don't have the uncertainty and the lack of control and the fear of being left behind, which is that resistance, then change isn't really inherently scary, right? So empowering folks, identifying the roles that really they would be serving and being really clear about those expectations, they can really be a part of it and it becomes less scary. So they're not resisting, they're trying to understand where they fit in the picture. And when you're doing that, you have to know that like change is both logical, right? Like we're like, here's the new org chart. This makes sense, right? But it's really emotional too, right? It's
Mhm.
not just logical. And so for me, like I'm a direct communicator. I rarely tie emotions to work, and I know that that's something that needs to not happen when we think about change. I need to be thoughtful on that, right? So I need to be able to show people in the org chart, this is where you're going to be, but then also say, okay, why does this matter, right? To
Mhm.
you, to your values, to your community. Because if there isn't both emotional and logical buy-in, then it's going to be like a rocky road, right? Um, so that's one, is like the people don't resist change. They resist the fact that they don't have any control and you didn't give them any part of involvement in this, right? So like
Mhm.
one big lesson. Lesson two, which I think we probably all know is, but always worth reiterating, communication is not the same as engagement. So,
Mm.
right,
Mm.
when we're emailing folks a plan, that's not them being engaged, that's them getting some information.
Mm.
Announcing the plan is not enough. True engagement is getting folks to be a part of the process. It's listening, it's co-creating, it's allowing people to shape what's being built. um, so as you go through change, you have to think about how do you include people, but note that like when you're doing that, it's going to be a little bit messy and that's okay, right? So early wins do matter. People seeing that you're trying to listen, even if it's like not perfect, that's going to help more than a perfect plan, is to say, like, how do you get people engaged early on throughout that process? You're building that momentum, even if you're stumbling along the way, and the small victories kind of like help that happen. So that's the piece. And then Crystal, because I'm talking about change and I really like change, I'm going to geek out for a moment and just, if you don't mind.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay. So like, now that like I spent more time in consulting, we're always trying to explain to people like what change looks like to people when it comes in, right? And this is the geeky part, right? So there is a change curve that maybe a lot of people know about, but it's the Kubler-Ross change curve, right? And you start up here and people go through all sorts of emotions, right? It's the idea of like you're denying the change, your anger, bargaining, depression, all that fun stuff, less fun stuff, I guess. And then you're trying to make way to acceptance, right? Acceptance is up here. You're going through that whole process. Everyone really wants to say, okay, let's just start with shocking people with information and hopping over to acceptance. Like, how come there's no specific bridge here? Well, because we have done nothing to get them through the rest of the parts of the process.
Mm.
So really when you're thinking about like engagement versus just communicating, you're helping kind of build that ladder so the curve isn't as deep, right? You're always going to have the process of people going through, those stressful moments, but you're not going to have as deep of a curve if you're using those tools to like get them moving forward. Does that make sense? So
It
that's
totally
my
makes
geeky part.
sense. It makes sense because I think we do want to just we want folks to get over it, right? Like this happens, it's a part of our work, get over it. This, we were asked to do this thing, just make it happen without
Right.
acknowledging that I think it can be hard, and that's different than the resistance piece you talked about. Like change and transition can be hard. There are theories about how to navigate transition and how do we make sure we're leaning into that more. That's really
Hmm.
powerful. Like we could stop here because I'm like, I need to go. This is great.
I could spend
So
days on change alone because it's
this
just
is
like
great.
it's so fascinating and fun. So
So I want to transition now and talk a little bit about again, like the fast pace, we're moving, we're always doing stuff in housing. It feels that way. So we also have a lot of meetings, Kristen, you might remember. So gatherings are constant. We have staff meetings, we have training, we have quick huddles in the hallway. How do we make sure that these moments feel meaningful and it's just not another thing on the calendar?
yes, the blocks and blocks of meetings. Oh my goodness,
Mhm,
the calendar is full.
mhm,
And then between meetings, you're like, oh yeah, let's just chat in the hallway real quick and get this thing done, and it's fine. What I would say is what we've listed, there's so many things on that, right? The staff meetings, the training sessions, the huddles, et cetera. It's to be intentional, right? There are so many gatherings, but they all should truly have different purposes, right? A staff training is not the same as a, a meeting, you know? And so we have to think about like, what's the purpose of a staff training session? Is it to learn specific skills? What are those skills? Why do they need those skills? We should be really intentional in outlining all that. But then we also shouldn't say, okay, we know the purpose. We hear you saying, the training session is to train. That's great. But then they're like, but also could we do a team building exercise in this? And
mm,
could we also like we have some announcements? Everyone's here, so could we tell them that? The answer should be no, right? The answer is never no. The answer is sure, at the end of it, let's do that. At the beginning, let's do this. Like, but that wasn't the purpose of that gathering. So we need to be really, really clear to say the intention of this gathering is this one thing. And it's not other things, or it could be two things, whatever those two intentions are, but then be ruthless about sticking to that intention. Um, One of the books that I read recently and I love is The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. And she reminds everyone, don't confuse a category with a purpose, right? A
mm,
wedding, a meeting, a happy hour, that's a format. That's not a
mm,
purpose when we
mm.
think about that, right? A wedding isn't just like, a wedding can look so different, right? Based on
Mhm.
who may be choosing to get married and how they're wanting to have that. But the purpose of it is very different than the activity. The purpose is to unite two people, or it's to, maybe it's to have families celebrate and bring this, group together, whatever it might be. That's different than the format, and so we need to think about that. And if we can't clearly articulate our purpose, could we cancel it? could we
Mm.
could we just cancel it, right? Like, we as leaders in organizations have ownership and could say, you know what, let's cancel it. Like, let's figure out ways to show that we value people's time, and we understand that if we can't articulate a purpose and be intentional, we shouldn't have it. And if we
Mm.
don't have time to develop that, maybe canceling some things would give us time to develop that for each of the areas.
Now, Kristen, let me tell you, we don't know how to do one thing. I do think it is time to have that conversation, right? On like what is the purpose? And how are we being really clear? And if we can't, like you said, if we can't describe it or name it, like why are we doing it, right? Sometimes we just keep practices and habits without really
Hmm.
examining where they came from and why. It's almost like that stop, start, continue exercise, right? So I
Right.
love that answer. Oh, I'm like, we just like to do a bunch of stuff. So
We do.
we do. So I want to, because now you're getting into asking folks to rethink like how we gather, or that feels like a big transformation for us. So, like, can you share a particular time when you were able to rethink how people came together and how it changed the game for a team? Does that question make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. So when I was working at higher ed, um, wait, I say way back when, it was a couple years ago, right? So it's not like ancient history, but things have changed. Um, one of my areas, I was over student activities, and we were combining basically two departments, right? We were creating our Center for Student Involvement, but the two departments were student activities and student orgs. And it was a big transformation of like, hey, these organizations have been around a long time. They need to be together to serve students better. And how do we do that in a way that's going to be effective, that's going to get people bought in, right? Because it's two different sets of organizational cultures.
Mm,
And it's also, so many other things, right? We're thinking like facility space. We're thinking about different humans and working styles. We're thinking about processes. We're thinking like, all the things. And, really thinking about, okay, how do we bring people together intentionally within these organizations to be supporting the work we do, improving the work we do, and really, going towards the purpose that we were combining for in the first place, right? And so, leading that, and I'll say, I'm going to talk about this as great things, but there's also always lessons learned and things I did wrong, right? Because
mhm,
I am a human, and I am not perfect. And so, people listening to this might be like, well, Kristen, this probably didn't go well. And you're like, probably didn't. You're right. Um, but yeah, so I think we really worked on co-creating and saying, okay, this is how we're going to do this with these areas. And we're going to think about like, this is the solution, but the good news is we can iterate on it, right? Some things, when you're deciding on a student org policy might need to sit a certain way for a year, right? With the academic year, the students sit that way. But then we can also say, you know what? That policy, this was the kind of bumpy for these reasons. How do we make it better? So an example of that would be even just students getting recognized, organizations getting started, right? We discovered as we were combining that there were 17 manual steps for students to go through to create a student org. That is bonkers. That is a lot of steps.
mhm,
And then we also told them that anywhere between a week and like 3 months later is when we'd officially be able to recognize them. We couldn't tell them how many days. We were just like, it might be in this range. That is also bonkers, right? Like, how
mhm,
come we can't tell them, hey, within 15 days you'll hear from us, and or something. And
mhm,
so really it was us going back. It was, we're thinking about our team, we're changing our team, and we're saying, okay, we're going to make adjustments, but they're going to be student focused. Our purpose, our intention is to be student focused. We want to make sure that our goals are the same as two teams becoming one. So it's students first. It's making sure the staff culture is something that we want to be here and show up for and be a part of it. And then we found ways that we could help people feel safe contributing, right? Like when you're doing in a reorg, it's not comfortable, as we talked about before, right? Like if people
mhm,
don't know their role, then
mhm.
they don't know where they fit. Like, is this new reorganization, is this going to remove my job? Right? That's scary,
Right.
And so we have to start out saying like, no, like this is how it's set up, we think for now, until you tell us this is not perfect, because you are an expert also in some of the work you do and can
Mhm,
provide feedback. Um, but also like, let's work on this together. So we still have rules, we still have policies, we still have, to be audit compliant, but we also got the space to kind of dream. And I think the nice thing is when you have some rules and guardrails, it also gives you a chance to really feel free and plan in a realistic way, right? Like we can all do these brainstorming activities where we come together and we're like, wouldn't it be great if? And it's like, well, no, we still have, a certain number of resources. We still have all these things. And so here's our parameters and here's our goal: serving students better, creating a great campus experience. How do we do all of those things, or these three things, and say we don't need to do 20 things, we need to do three things really well? How do we do it as a team? And like I said, focusing really on our team culture. We brought together, one team has a Friday, morning dance party, but the other team does, loves March Madness. How do we combine those traditions so people aren't feeling left out in a way that they can still show up and feel supported? So I think it's just, going back to your question of rethinking how people come together, really when it comes to a team, is saying, okay, there's not going to be one expert. There's going to be a leader that does need to say, okay, let's figure out the direction we're going and align folks. but it's also making sure people feel valued and supported and really intentionally present and they have a purpose and a role in the whole process.
Wow, I like so you're talking about, again, the purpose, the communication pieces, making sure that people can connect themselves to these shifts and movement. And you talk about the leader's responsibility in that. And so I'm hearing this. I want to ask you about connecting like the big picture to the day to day, because the leaders usually are operating at this 10,000-foot view, right? They're thinking big picture. And then the folks who are doing a lot of the work are doing the day to day, right? And so, how do you think leaders in housing or residence life can do a better job of linking the why of a meeting or day to day operations to the what and how?
Yeah, yeah. We could all do a better job at that, right? Because I think we get stuck in the grind of we have this meeting, we have this training, we have this thing. Of course, everyone knows why we're doing this in the big picture because it's all here, right? Like as a leader, that's our day-to-day headspace. And it's not the day-to-day headspace of people potentially, in the front doing the more intricate, detailed work. And so I think it's the realization that it might not be the day-to-day thought process, right?
Mm,
But then I think it's also, as the host, as the leader of like say a training event, whatever, and you're asking, the question, at a meeting, the host has the power. They need to own that. They need to say, okay, like the quote I think is something along the lines of like neutrality is not hospitality, right? If you're showing up
mm,
and saying like, hey, here's the meeting, nope, you set the tone as the host. You're creating the conditions, you're enforcing the norms, you're taking responsibility really for shaping that experience before the meeting, during the meeting, and after, right? So before the meeting, have you sent the agenda? Do you have the purpose of the meeting on the agenda? Are you talking about maybe even why that purpose links to the bigger picture? Is everyone going to read it? Maybe not, right? We know that they're busy, but like it's one step in the picture.
mhm.
During the meeting, how are you doing that? How are you thinking about during the meeting, creating that intention and being very specific, and then after? And I think that really goes to like the during and the after is like you need to open with purpose, you need to close with intention. So that opening needs to be like, are there opening rituals that you do to set the tone, clarify expectations? Don't don't just come in and be like, hey everyone, we'll start the meeting. Hey everyone, we'll start the training. Whatever. We want them to feel like they understand why they're here. They're excited, or if they're not excited, which is okay, like that they are passionate and see the importance of the work that's happening in that room, right? And then when it comes to closing, closing with intention. We're not ending a meeting saying, "Oh, thanks for coming."
Right,
Like this has been
right.
great. We're not ending the meeting with, "Oh, I'll just give you 2 minutes back. Have a good one." Like
Mm,
nope. We are ending a meeting with, "I'm grateful that you came to attend, and I am excited to see these action items come to fruition to achieve XYZ purpose. And I appreciate that you all in this room are contributing to XYZ, right? Like purpose of
yes.
organization, purpose of whatever." And it's not much different, right? Like they were all through that meeting, but you're closing it, right? And same even thinking about like an event, right? It doesn't have to be just meetings, but an event, instead of ending the event saying like, thank you for coming to our concert, comedian, whatever event it is, we're ending the event, which is might sound silly, but we're saying, we're grateful you attended the event. We're excited that you're part of XYZ university and that as you move forward in your day, this makes you feel more connected to whatever the purpose is. Let's reiterate that. And it sounds really like kind of silly because why are we doing that? Like, especially like, can you imagine, students rolling their eyes when they're hearing that, right? Like, oh, right. But they don't have to necessarily, they can think it's cheesy, but they are hearing inside that we want them to be part of something. We did this
Yes.
in a way that felt thoughtful and intentional, and that we want them to be part of our community. We want them to know why. And I think that whether it's a meeting, whether it's an event, I think you can do that. And it's not hard. It's just a small twist of language that could really create those meetings to tie that how and the what and the why all together.
And how affirming, right? Like you make people feel like spending time together, right, felt good, right? Like they
Because it
contribute,
did, right?
right? It felt good and it was thoughtful, and it's like it feels like an honor that we shared this space together. And then
hmm
as a leader to model what a meeting could look like, because I think we just assume, here's the job, go lead this meeting, go facilitate. There are some folks who are just making stuff up because they haven't
Yeah.
seen a good meeting structure, don't have anything to pull from, or they've been in bad meetings and they replicate that because they haven't seen any different. And so I think you just shared a really beautiful opportunity for leaders to model with intention how to be in community with others, when you're bringing folks together. So I want to talk about, as you know, or may remember from your time in housing, everything feels important, right?
Oh
Everything is
yeah.
a priority. How do you stay focused as a team when you're pulled in what feels like 100 directions, right?
Hmm. My first knee jerk answer to that is don't give teams hundreds of priorities, right? Like,
Come
don't.
on.
Um, because I mean, that's part of it. It's like nothing's going to get done well if you have all these priorities. And I also understand the world that we live in and how work comes in. But I do think I like, if I don't answer this question with part of this answer, at least it's not fair to say, like, leadership needs to do a better job of slimming down the list of priorities,
Mm,
right? Like they just need to do a better job at that. And I understand, particularly, we have all different levels in an org. If you're a middle manager, or even like, it's hard. There's a lot of compressing needs. But I would say, taking stock in, we have this list of all these priorities. Are they true? Are they real? Right? Like, I remember I had an employee once that came to me and was like, here's the annual report for blah 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 thing, right? And she's like, I pull it every year and it takes, so long, blah blah blah. I was like, cool, what do I do with this? Because I was new in the role. And she's like, oh, well, leadership really wanted me to pull it. And I said, okay, who do they pass it along to? Who normally looks at it? What's this like? And she's like, oh, well, I don't know that. And
mm,
what I discovered after looking up is that nope, nobody above was reading it. The person who was in my role previously, not even previously, at some point in time in this history, you
mhm.
know, took like 3 bullets from that report that took her a week to pull, um, and used it for something. Okay, can I just get those 3 bullets? And like, let's change, let's be iterative, not additive with the work that we're doing, right?
Yes.
And so I think, first and foremost, when you're pulled in 100 directions, make sure those are really the 100 directions they need to be. And as leadership, we should narrow that down. Now, I also know the real world and where we are, that like, we don't all have the power to do that, depending on
Right.
our role, depending on everything. And so, when you sent me this question in advance, it made me think of a lovely podcast that I listened to last week. I don't know, but I'm a Swiftie. And so I got to watch the lovely Taylor Swift. And she said something that was like that moment of, yeah, of course. I don't know if you watched it, Crystal. Go back and watch it. But she said, you should think of your energy as if it's expensive, as if it's a luxury item not everyone can afford. And what you spend your energy on, that's the day. And in my head, I was like, yes, like that is the be ruthless with your time, right? So in the context of housing, what's the most important? You got students, you got safety, you got facility, you got belonging, you got connection. All of those are important. And it's going to be really hard for you to say, okay, it's only safety today, or it's only, I get that, because it can vary day to day by leader and their role. And so, again, to geek out, because I love theories and formats and et cetera, is like the decision, like there's decision matrices, right? So like in your head, you're not going to write this down every day, but it's the idea, it's the Eisenhower matrix. I'm sure you've used it, where you're
Yeah.
talking about like not important, important, urgent, not urgent, right? And if you
Yes.
find something that is not urgent and not important, you just shouldn't be doing it, right? In your day. Like,
Yes.
you're really going to spend this time on the urgent and important, or the not urgent and important part of this, like,
Yeah.
chart. And if you're spending time in anything that's not important, you need to ask why. And you need to say, like, and really push back and say, okay, I'm communicating to my supervisor, this is overwhelming. There's too many priorities. This is confusing. This is unclear. This is how I'm prioritizing. Does this align with your needs? Right? Because we're only human and we can only spend so many days on the work that we're doing, so many hours. So the leaders need to listen to that and then make adjustments as well. So I think, really, as you're thinking about, how are we prioritizing? How are we making sure that people can stay focused when they're pulled in a bunch of directions? It's saying, what's truly important? How do I spend my time? My time is valuable. And, the university that I work for knows my time is valuable. And so how can I make sure that they understand, the asks they're giving me? Because sometimes that's part of it too, is where leadership doesn't understand the time it takes, right? I didn't maybe know that that person was spending a week pulling a report that I would take 3 bullet points from. If I'd known that, I might have, we can shift things, right? And so how are we communicating really the time spent, so those priorities can be really centered on the work that we're doing and the timing that it needs to be taken care of?
Yes, because I don't know. all the intricacies of my assistant director's day to day. I don't. I have an idea. I
Well,
can,
and you shouldn't.
right? Right? That's not my job, right? Like who wants
Yeah, that's,
that? Like I do
you have
not
great
believe
folks.
in
Yeah.
micromanaging. That's not fun for them or me, right? And
Hmm.
so, and with that said, I need them to be able to tell me, right, the things that they want to lift up. And I also have to be
Hmm.
asked the right questions because otherwise we're going to be making stuff up. They also don't know what I'm doing in my day. And they can
Hmm.
look at my calendar, right? They can guess, but also how am I as a leader thinking about succession planning, right? How am I making sure
Hmm.
that if this is something they want to do, or if I'm out, they can also respond. So I think
Right.
there's a lot of things wrapped up in there. In addition to the prioritizing pieces, it's really communicating the pieces that need to, and then also being open to listening to your folks when they ask questions, A, and B, are really open about their time and how it's being
Hmm.
utilized so we can definitely support them differently and better. So I want to ask you, do you have any thoughts, any quick thoughts about like how can we function in different and better ways to make people want to stay? We're talking about there's a ton of stuff happening, you know, there might be good communication, trust. There might be, stuff that we need to do different and better, but at the core of it, what are your thoughts on getting people to stay, especially in what's happening in higher ed, all the things happening? There's morale pieces, people questioning value and worth. I mean, the list goes on and on. But, what would be your advice on what makes people want to stay in housing or just being a part of a team?
Mm, hmm. Hmm. Um, it's such an interesting time right now too, right? Over the past years, the transition of people in and out of the field and just different ways we're looking at higher education and different stresses from all aspects of things. So, um, great question about how can gatherings like really help people make them want to stay, right? Um, and I'm gonna like again prepping for this, I was like, these are the people. Like, I don't want to like quote something or say something that I'm like not accrediting to the right people. So I'm like, who was this person that said this thing? So, one person that I love learning from is Lovia Ajayi-Jones. I don't know. She's an author. She wrote the Professional Troublemaker. She's got a great TED Talk. She's got a couple other books as well. But one of the things she says is that too many people are out here acting like their existence is not a revolution. And, so when we're designing gatherings, taking that into context, I'm like, okay, so we're designing gatherings in higher ed and housing, and we're connecting our staff. We have to understand that some people just showing up is that radical act, and that the space needs to be worth their presence. And we need to make sure that we're centering purpose and belonging and not just checking boxes to say, hey, come to this meeting because you're an employee. Come to this meeting because you live in this hall. Come to this event. No, you are important and we are here doing this thing, and you are here because we know you should be here because we want you to be part of us, right? That means that we are like showing up authentically, we're being supportive, we're in an environment that's going to receive authenticity as well, and we're okay with that. And so thinking about that, it's almost like saying, generosity and like taking off your cool kid hat is what one of my
Mhm.
employees used to say, is like, we're not going to be chill, we're going to be over the top generous with our space, with our planning, with our like way to connect, because we want folks to feel like they are a part of something and that it's not like just an offhanded thing, right? So if I'm bringing the staff some snacks, it's not just, okay, here's some snacks. I have thought about what they can eat. I put out a tablecloth because you know what? It feels nicer and it's not as grubby, right? Like, we're doing things that make people feel supported and feel connected and feel like they're okay to, you know, be there. And I think sometimes we don't want to look over the top, but I think when people say that, they're almost too nervous to own that they're really trying to be generous and support their colleagues and their team. And I want people to feel that I've thought through something. I think the other piece, and I know, Crystal, you're like, a quick answer. I'm trying, I promise. Uh, is the idea of like making people know that you've thought about them and creating like a everyone. So my example, so like creating a gathering that everybody like gets them out of their roles and routines. So like once a year for us, we would always do a retreat, right? And it goes through, and just like my annual retreat, we were creating this temporary world that like every year you didn't know what was going to happen. You knew that Kristen, as the leader, was going to give you a secret activity. Half of the day was a secret activity that no one knew. I booked it. No one got to, like, people didn't see my credit card receipts till later, whatever. And it was like, we went to a trapeze class, we went curling, we went to a cooking class, we went painting. It was something not related. It was something that no one was probably good at, right? Like we were all going to be together creating this space where everyone could feel a part of it. And I think doing those things show, like it's going that every year tradition where we're part of something, of like the secret activity. We're removing our cool kid caps and we're going to all learn something together and be connected. We're going to show up in a space that we all feel like who we are, but also slightly uncomfortable because we're doing something we're not used to. I think those are the things that help build a team, but really showing up and saying, we understand that you're here and we value your presence as who you are, not just because you work for us. That's how you build a team. That's how you keep people connected and keep them staying.
I am already thinking about this large meeting I'm leading next week for my team. And I was like, I'm gonna get a tablecloth, right? Like it's just, like how do you make people feel, that they're a part of something and that they matter? Because I tell my team, I say, more often than not, I want you to feel joy when you come to
Hmm.
work. And so how do you
Yes.
take that from a concept to reality? And so you've given me a lot to think about. I got 7 days, 7 days,
At
Kristen.
that
It's gonna
time.
be
Well, it
great.
doesn't have to be nice,
I
right? It just has to be
got
like, it has to be
time.
something that you've thought about. It doesn't have to be
Yes.
nice and fancy. It's just when they walk in the room, they feel cared for, right?
I love this. I love this. My team thanks you. They thank you. Future Crystal thanks you. So I want to talk about boundaries were shifting. So we spend a lot of time at work and housing, and then the majority of our staff, right, they live on campus, they live where they work.
Hmm.
And that can be a little tricky. And I think sometimes there's this implication that because we spend so much time together, we have to be friends, right? There's all this
Oh
stuff that
yeah.
makes things blurry. And so, how can leaders set the tone for healthy boundaries while still building connection?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, it's so hard, right? Living on campus, and there's those boundaries, I think, between students and staff, and then staff, like to your point, staff, like you don't have to be besties, but I think a lot of the staff that are maybe live on, typically are moving to a place that they don't have a big network, and so they're trying to find their network in a lot of the ways because they're working so much, they're finding it through work. Not a bad thing, but also finding ways to expand that so that there's a bigger network for someone, right?
Hmm.
You know, in my mind, when it comes to setting boundaries, I think that clarity is kindness, right? Setting those boundaries, holding them consistently, it's kind and it removes confusion, right? If you are holding those and you're clear, no confusion. Um, and I like to think of it kind of as like a structured empathy, right? You can model healthy boundaries by protecting your time, by ending meetings early, by encouraging time off, and then being away on time off. You know, making it okay to decline optional invites, right? There's a lot of like, oh, well, there's this thing if you want to come. Well, now I live here, so I guess I have to go to the thing. No, you don't. You don't. But within that structure, so we're thinking about like structured empathy. The idea is that we also need to still offer care in a way that makes sense, right? So it could be a handwritten note, a shout out, like having those regular one-on-ones and talking through certain things. You can still create the empathy in a different way, but connection doesn't require constant availability. It requires intentionality. And so really that's how you draw those lines. It's hard. And I think also the piece is you can communicate, so I say hold those boundaries. If you don't one time, how about you let someone know, hey, normally that's my boundary and I didn't really hold it. In the future, I'm going to change it. Now that sounds like a super awkward conversation because it probably is. And it sounds uncomfortable because it probably is. But
Hmm.
I also think what's more uncomfortable is not keeping those boundaries in the long term and then kind of digging yourself into this hole that you can't get out of. And
Yeah.
so I think, you know, figuring that out and working with even a trusted colleague, trusted friend, trusted, whoever to figure out, okay, how do I do this? And it's going to take time, especially if you're entrenched in a certain way right now. And maybe it's picking one thing and then making that change and then the next thing. Or at the start of the school year is a great time to restart and say, hey, here's where we're going to land with things. And I think people understand and they say, oh, you know what, you were clear. I get it. I'm fine, right? So I think that's my 2 cents is really clarity is kindness, hold your boundaries,
Yes.
be
Okay.
empathetic.
Yes. And I like the structured empathy piece that you talked about too. Okay, so I have one more question for you. Um, I'm sometimes not a fan of the magic wand question, but I want to do it today because Why not? So, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about how we gather or how we function in housing, right? As we've been talking about intentionality and structured empathy, etc. Like, what would it be? One thing.
You're gonna get me on my soapbox, Crystal. For me, I would say if I had a magic wand, I would tweak, like I'd shift an entire mindset around why we gather.
Mm,
So like higher ed and housing, we default to gathering as our way to inform. We're pushing out updates, we're distributing logistics, we're meeting some requirement that we have to have this meeting or training. And what if instead of that, we approached every gathering as a chance to transform? So we were transforming relationships, transforming perspectives, teams, culture. Like maybe that's what we do instead of passing out, information. So that magic wand, because it's magical, would I'd embed kind of like the idea of like purpose and belonging as like non-negotiables in the meeting or the training. And before inviting anyone, I would be like, how do we want people to feel during this meeting or event or training? Like, what do we want them to do differently afterwards? What do they need to know? Who needs to be in the room? Who doesn't need to be in the room? Who do we feel like we've been inviting only because we felt like we've had to, but really they're not the right person to be here, and let's give them their time back. How do we design that gathering to create connection? We over index on format. It's a meeting, it's a training, instead of thinking about why. And so really that systems level shift is like my magic wand, where we normalize the opening rituals that we talk about. We use principles that like design the meeting around inclusiveness, especially those who maybe don't get the chance to speak up or feel like they're apart. We structure for depth, not just efficiency, so that we're creating good tension, brave conversations, joy, as you may have mentioned, right? Like
yeah.
all those things. And so like those meetings and those gatherings are really places that we're practicing our values. So if we want our programs, higher ed, housing, et cetera, to be places of inclusion and meaning and growth, then our gatherings should model that. And so it's not about getting the right people in the room, it's about making that room really worth being in. That's my magic wand.
Come on now. I would pay for that. I mean, that's why you're in consulting. This is good stuff.
It's like it's so
Oh,
exciting.
yes. So we are coming to the end of our time. You've shared some amazing resources already. I have been writing stuff down. And if folks wanted to learn more, are there additional resources? Like, what would you recommend? Where should they start?
Ooh, there are plenty. I mean, I listed some in this, so I will definitely make sure you get those. Because I mean, like the Art of Gathering with Priya Parker. Like I was just thinking she should just keep preaching to me about like all of the amazing ideas when it comes to how to have an event and a gathering that makes sense and is purposeful. I think that the work from Olivia Ajayi-Jones really just speaks to me and the ability to like make people feel connected and show their worth and know their worth. And so I think those things aligning with meeting and gathering are two top ones. And then some of those, nerdy curves and whatever, just like applying it to theory, I think really blends it all together. So I will send those over. They can be dug into further. And then if something else pops in my mind, it'll be added to that list too. Could be a surprise resource number 7 or whatever.
I love a good surprise resource. So these are so great, and we'll definitely get them to, add it to the show notes so we can share them out with folks. So this was such a delightful conversation. Tons of great information, things that I know I'm going to add to my toolkit. And so I just want to thank you, Kristen, for joining me today.
Thank you. It was so much fun. Great chatting with you.
Yes, and thank all of you for joining us on this episode of ResEdChat. If you have an idea for a topic or a person that you would like us to have on the show, please let us know for reaching out. Please let us know and reach out to Roompact. Thank you so much and take care.